Hello, I'm Kevin Hong. I'm a partner at LYC Partners, an executive search and leadership advisory firm. I'm also the co-founder of The Council, a private network for senior executives. And this is Leaders in Motion. My guest today is Guilhem Souche, a global luxury beauty executive with over 25 years of experience at L'Oréal, LVMH, and Coty. He led the development of billion-dollar ranges like Lancôme Absolue and Génifique as SVP Global Skincare. At LVMH, he helped make Parfum Christian Dior the leader in makeup and fragrance in China, establishing icons like Dior Rouge 999 with Dior and J'adore. At Coty, he boosted brand presence in China through flagship stores, online and offline, and led the post-COVID recovery of Coty travel retail business through brand elevation, service excellence, and retail attainment. Guilhem, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
First, to know more about you, if you can give us a quick introduction of yourself, where you are today and what led you to different countries and ultimately to Asia.
I'm French. I was born in the south of France, but since my early days, I've always wanted to work abroad. So this is one of the reasons why I embraced this career, working for big groups like L'Oréal, LVMH, or Coty. It was always motivation for me to work abroad. I've been working for about 30 years in three big companies. I started in development in Lancôme, as you mentioned, out of skincare. And then in 2008, a change in my life. I moved to China, and I stayed in China from 2008 to 2018. Then I went 2 years in Canada. Then I really missed China, so I went back to China in 2020. And I'm in Singapore since 2022.
On this show, we talk about leadership. So I have a question for you. What's a place in Asia that changed how you lead? And
I think I just gave you a hint. China completely transformed my approach to leadership, because when I arrived in 2008, I really very fast realized that everything was very different from what I knew. And in fact, I realized that success was not about replicating what I knew, but making things that were relevant to a world that I was just beginning to understand. So what I had to do is to listen fast, to listen as much as possible, to build trust with the teams, to test very fast. This is where I discovered China speed, and also to empower local teams without losing global visions. So I also learned something very important, is that when you are overseas, you are a guest in the country that hosts you. And it's a lesson of humility, of agility. So at the same time, you are expected to deliver results and put your expertise and leadership at the service of the team.
How can you describe your career in 3 words?
If you just give me 3 words, I would say brands, the first word, international, and people. Brands, because I've always been working in companies with strong brands, and I really love to work with the headquarters, with the local teams, to build and to elevate the brands. International, because working in different countries, learning from these different countries has always been a motivation for me. And it has built me today as a manager, as a leader, and also has influenced a lot on my family. 2 kids born in, for instance, in China out of 3. And people, those people, e-commerce, clients, partners, they are on a daily basis the reason why you keep on running, where the energy and the ideas are coming from is from people.
One decision you got wrong early, and what it taught you about markets or people?
So early in my career, I was in charge of Lancôme Skincare, and it was a big leading brand. I had successfully reorganized the portfolio, so we had strong innovation. The range was very easy to understand, both for the sales associates and for the customers. And it's very important to be easy to understand for the sales, because they are really the one, making the last step in the stores. And then for tactical reasons, I was asked to launch a range that didn't really fit with that strategy. I had expressed my doubts clearly, but I didn't resist enough, and I had to launch, and it failed. In the end, I was blamed for it. So what did I learn from that? I learned that it's very important, and it's an advice I always give to my teams, to follow your convictions. So of course, I think you need to stay open to input, to suggestions, to study the directions that people are asking you to study. But in the end, you need to be able to own your decisions. And if it works, you are proud. If it fails, you are accountable. But the worst feeling for me is to be blamed for something you didn't believe it from start.
I would say on a comment that particularly in China or in countries where hierarchy is very strong, that might be a very valuable advice.
Yeah, I would say that in the end, if you want to stay motivated on a daily basis, if you're junior, if you're senior, it doesn't really matter. but it's better to really follow your convictions. Of course, always taking into account what your teams and your colleagues are feeding back to you. But you have to be following your conviction, because that's the only way to keep motivated.
Gen Z, for instance, they would tend to follow their convictions maybe very early on in their career. What do you think?
I think that it has to be balanced. Conviction doesn't mean that you know everything. And so you are working with lots of people who know things, either because they have the experience, because they are more senior, or because you are touching a field of the industry that is specific to their... And it's always good to follow your conviction, but to stay open to what your peers and colleagues and management are telling you. Because in the end, most of the time it's not about being black or white. It's a mix of colors, and the ideas of several people are often giving better results than the idea of one person. But so it's important that your conviction will be the guiding line. But then, of course, you need to integrate all the good ideas coming from others.
This is all about the nuance, I imagine. And a ritual that keeps you grounded on the road, because on the roads, what keeps you grounded for you not to have these convictions and really always believe in them? And what keeps you grounded?
I would say two rituals. One is about running and the other one is about walking. So the first one is that I run every morning. I think it's good for my body, it's good for my mind, and in the end, it's a me time. It's something you can do before you start your day. I also learn, by the way, to run with other people. I think it's a very healthy way to connect. So if you are in Singapore, feel free to connect with me. I would be more than happy to connect with you on next Wednesday. I'm planning a run with what we call a global TR run. So that's something I really like to do. And another ritual is more about walking, and that's something I do in the office. So normally, I always take the longest way to get to my desk in the morning, and when I leave also in the evening. Gives me a chance to meet with people, to sense the energy, and to feel the temperature of the team. So I think I like this small time of exchanging before we all start or end the day.
30 days in particular to learn the market beyond what you knew, the data, and who did you listen to, and what surprised you?
So you have to imagine the situation when I landed in China in 2008. It was my second time in China. I had been there, I think, once in 2000, and it was a real shock. Just imagine when you ask for water in China, for a foreigner used to drinking ice water. In China, it's lukewarm water. Everything was such a shock on a daily basis. I could not read, I could not speak, and at the same time, I was asked to lead a local team and a brand. So it was really about being pushed in the pool and having to learn swimming at the same time. So what did I do? I think that I relied on what the only sense I could rely on, which was my eyes. So I went to the field, and to be able to watch, to ask a lot of questions, to accelerate my learnings, and to get as much information as possible by myself, with the team, of course. Then I think asking questions was also very important. And I often asked the same question to different people. This was for me a way to make sure that I had a clear understanding, not only of the situation, but also of whom I could trust and on what topic. Some people were giving you very sincere answers. Some people were just sugarcoating the answer. And it was very important for me to get to know who I could trust. And this is the people I started relying on after. I also tried to give sincere and candid feedback. If I was sent there, there was a reason. I was an expert in branding. I was an expert in skincare. I had led marketing teams in another country like Italy, for instance. And at that time, China team was very talented, with people coming from the best universities in the country, but quite junior. So on the one hand, they knew China very well, but on the other hand, they had not been exposed to the outer world. There were plenty of things that they hadn't been done yet. So my job was really to work with them, to give feedback so that I could accelerate their learning. I can say that these first 30 days were intense, but even more than the first 30 days.
What are the 2 or 3 signals that now you watch when to judge whether a global plan will travel locally?
In fact, it's quite a simple way of assessing, and it's not specific to Asia or to China. I always try to ask myself these 3 questions. Is it good for sales? Is it good for the brand's image? And does it bring something new to the customer? So if the answer to these 3 questions is yes, then I think we can proceed with the plan. Either making a global plan become relevant locally, but it also works the other way around, because you can have some plans that are created from local teams in one country. And if it's good for sales, good for image, and it's relevant to the customer, it's a plan that can become a global plan.
Could you present a launch that initially missed the mark locally, and what did customers tell you in words or behavior, and that global didn't see, and what did you change?
I think, so when I started working with couture brands are very into control. They want to control the image. Preserving and elevating the image is clearly extremely important for these brands in terms of strategy, in terms of execution. And so sometimes you are facing teams in the headquarters who say, okay, I am responsible for this launch, for this project, and I want it to be executed exactly the same way everywhere in the world without really adapting to local realities. And what I realized is that this hardly works, and it can even create big mistakes. Sometimes, there are crises when there is a cultural sensitivity involved. But most of the time, you need to work on local relevancy. And if you push something that is one size fits all solution imposed by headquarters and it fails, there is first a big business impact, and there is also a big negative impact on the trust between HQ and the local team. So normally you have a situation where HQ think, okay, execution was poor, the team in the country didn't do a good job, and local teams, they feel unheard, and they feel blamed for something they didn't believe in and they are warned about. So it's going back to the conviction topic. It's really a lose-lose situation. So for me, I think it was one of my big topics while I was in China, was how to fix this situation. And it takes a bit of time because first you need to rebuild the trust between HQ and local teams. So it means spending a lot of time explaining local specificities and even doing it when you're not asked to, but it's feeding global, with examples so that they understand by themselves what's happening in the countries. And on the other hand, you also need to explain to local teams what is truly on brand and what is not on brand. Sometimes, local teams, they are on the numbers, in the sales, they want to go very fast and they put the image at risk. And so it's very important in this case, especially when you are a leader in China, managing people, as we were saying before, who are quite junior, which was the case in 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It's very important to create a process that integrates local feedback early before the decisions are locked. And so that in the end, this local feedback can be integrated and everyone feels the ownership on the results.
Like you said, everything, the local team, they want to go fast and they care about the numbers, and sometimes it can hurt the brand. But on the other side, there are things that need to be localized. And do you have, for instance, a playbook of elements that almost always needs localization in beauty?
So I think everything you mentioned is correct. Price, media, retail, everything needs to be adapted to the country. And this is the role of the local teams. But for me, what moves the needle first, it's even more simpler, it's the product. So you need to have the right product for the country. Let's say, so I'm an expert in beauty. So if we talk about skincare, for instance, if you want to succeed in Asia, you need to have products that fit with the local routines that are much more complex in Asia, even more in Japan and Korea than in China, than they are in the Western world. The textures also must be adapted. For instance, we keep on talking about skincare or foundation. You know that if you want to sell a cream in January in Dongbei, you need to have a very, very rich texture. If you want to launch in Shanghai end of June, it's completely different. It's very warm, very humid, and you have to have the kind of products adapted to this season. Same thing for makeup. You need to make sure that the foundation suits the skin tones. The lipstick is in trend with the regions. Sometimes, some brands think that I got a name, I got a product, I can launch in Asia, and it's true for many other regions. The first thing they need to look at is, do I have the right product that will answer the customer needs in this region? So I think this is really the base. And once you have that, yes, you have to work on media, which is very different in every region, on pricing, which is also facing different competitive situations, on retail. For instance, in Asia, you have like more flagships than what you can have in Europe. But all of this will amplify the offer you have, and not fix the issue if you have an issue with the product.
And I imagine that localization is always a topic where, in the end of the day, headquarters give you some green lights for some topics and some others. So you need allies, right? So how did you build allies in the headquarters, and what deck or artifacts help you shift minds?
I would say that what is important is to speak the same language or to align on a common language. So my background is in branding and marketing. So I started in HQ leading Lancôme Skincare in product development. I was in charge of product development, communication, education, store design for Lancôme Skincare. So this is where I learned to speak the HQ language. Then when I moved to Dior, I started working with couture brands. I learned how to work in an environment with a much stronger artistic direction. What was very important was what we call the Maison spirit. Protecting the brand integrity is really what you do on a daily basis. And you cannot denature the brand. It's very important that you protect that. But of course, your job is to make the brand resonate locally. So with these two experiences, I think it gave me the right skills to build the bridges between HQ and local market. And this is really actually one of my favorite roles along my career. So after that, when I moved into a market leadership roles, I used this. And I think first thing what was important is to influence HQ. So to help them, understand our reality. And this means that you have to train your team to educate HQ continuously. You talk about what are the trends, you explain what are the market situations, and you do it early enough so that when you really need something, your feedback is already understood, already integrated into the strategy. So it's an ongoing process. And I think this role of bridge today, it's really what is one of the most motivating aspects of my career. It's always the same mental filters. Is it good for sales? Is it good for image? Is it good for, and is it unique? And if I do that in a country and it works, then I think I can share with global teams. I can share with my peers in other markets so that they can adapt it to their own realities. And I think it's quite positive when you do so because, in fact, there is a great emulation between business units, for instance. So when the market is showing that something worked with this local reality, it's different than when the headquarters are telling you should do that. So if you are MD or marketing director from let's say Japan and you see that Korea or China is succeeding, in fact, normally you self-challenge yourself and try to find a way to make it succeed in your team. And I think it's a very, very positive effect that basically generates a lot of creativity from the teams.
And do you have can you name any local innovations that were later adopted globally? What made this approval possible?
I would say that the best example in my mind on which I've worked is Rouge 999 from Dior. So it's quite a fascinating story, and it's a success that started locally and then became a global icon. It starts from the heritage, as often in the couture and luxury brands. This shade actually was born in 1953, so it was Dior first lipstick. It was called shade 9, then it became shade 99, and this color, this tint, has been in the assortment forever. In 2018, when I joined Dior in China, we upgraded the formula and relaunched it as a 999. And this is where, in fact, with the China team, we connected two ideas. So first idea was the couture legacy, timeless color, always in the assortment. And what we added was the cultural resonance of the number 9, which is very auspicious in China. It means longevity, prosperity, very easy to remember. And so we started playing with this story. At the same time, the shade was very, very suitable to Chinese lips and Asian skin tones. So we decided, to put in this renovation, it was not only one shade renovating, it was a whole assortment, but we decided to play all in on that story of 999 in terms of retail, in terms of social, in terms of brand activation. So this was the story we were telling, the story we were showing. And it became a huge success in China, to the point that we had to build some production lines in France to feed the demand. This Rouge Dior 999 turned into a global lipstick icon. Then we worked hand in hand with Global, with HQ, to build the long-term strategy. So in fact, it's a strategy which was quite similar to what was done previously on fragrances, with Miss Dior, J'adore, that were icons that were built, semester after semester. The same for lipstick and adapting the communication. In the past, you have to know that makeup was mainly about newness, fashion. And we played it as an icon, coming back to this 999 story every 6 months, making sure that it was always visible. And this was a big shift, in fact. It was a shift from short-term launch of novelty to long-term brand icons. And it really, I think, changed the way prestige, in fact, brands approach the makeup.
Do you have any time where you failed to convince headquarters?
So I have two examples in mind. By the way, both of them are about digital and China. So which is not the case, because digital in China is probably one of the most advanced country in the world. So the first one in digital was in e-commerce. It was before COVID. I wanted to open a Tmall flagship store. As we often say in luxury, if you want to control your image, you control your distribution. And there was a strong concerns from top management about, the brand image and the control of brand image in a platform like Tmall. So I didn't manage to convince my management. And in fact, the consequence was very serious because COVID came quite fast after that with a big hit on physical distribution. And the brand was late online and lost a lot of market share versus the competitors who had already opened their flagships. The second one is also about digital, more on the customer relationship, so CRM aspect. I was working on licenses. So you have everything you do to the headquarters, but also to the fashion houses. And I tried to convince headquarters and fashion houses to let the China team launch WeChat-based CRM programs. So if you live in China, if you know China, you know that it's completely natural. Basically, whatever you do it through WeChat. Supermarket, everything is, you can connect anything with WeChat, but it's not obvious to headquarters in Europe. And they feared again that they would lose control over communication. So in the end, it took me a lot of time to convince. So yes, we did it, but it was far too long. And for me, the loss was that in the end, we spent a lot of money trying to recruit customers, to touch them once, and we were losing them because we couldn't reconnect with them. So it was a big loss of opportunity, while for competition, they could connect with their customers 3-4 times a month with individual messages. So this shows, I think, it shows the importance of digital in China, and the importance of having a global teams that really understand how this separate world, which is Chinese digital, works. So if I look back, in fact, I think I should have kept on pushing. Maybe in French, we say manque à gagner, which is the opportunity cost of not acting fast enough. And I think I should have emphasized on that even more, because I think there is a huge cost of inaction, which in this case was much bigger than the risk of changing.
What's the perception of China and their headquarters?
Yes, I think 15 years ago, in fact, talking about 15 years ago, but there are people who went to China 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And it was still, I think, a land for adventurers. It was growing very fast. When you were going there, in fact, very few people knew what to expect. Many businesses were still managed from Hong Kong, from Singapore, which were maybe a way of living in Asia. China was not as central as it is now. And it was also a very exciting time in terms of, personally, Shanghai was the city, for instance, where everything was possible. A bit like New York, probably in the middle of the 20th century. 10 years ago, it changed, and China became actually the engine of APAC. In fact, to succeed there, you needed a strong business acumen, you needed to have brand building skills, and you needed to be able to manage huge scale, because China was becoming the number 1, number 2, number 3 subsidiary for nearly every brand in luxury. So it was a phase in which succeeding in China was maybe the best career accelerator you could. Then, sense is a change. Change is not finished. In 2022, so there was COVID with a complete stop in 2020, but a very fast growth in the summer of 2020. 2022, there was another big change with the lockdown, and many companies refocus on other regions. They reduced the expat roles. And also many companies lost, I think, the connection with their teams and with the customers in China. So I think for me, what I would advise if you want to succeed is to have a consistent and long-lasting approach and not to go with stop and go, because this really doesn't work in China. And today, I think it's a new positive phase. I see China re-emerging as it's becoming a pole of stability with a very long-term vision in a world where things are changing everywhere. And it means that there are new career opportunities, both for global teams global brands who want to reconnect with China. And what is new is that it's also a great opportunity with Chinese brands who are now looking to expand internationally. So you can see that in automotive, for instance, but it's something that is also coming in sports, leisure, in beauty. And I think that's a very new, interesting phase for a career.
Which markets or channels would give disproportionate learning per year in the future, as you see? Could be regions like Southeast Asia. What do you think?
Let's stay also, again, I'm going to refocus on beauty and perfumes. So I think first, if you look at, people are the customers, where are the customers today? There are some countries, some regions where there are more and more people that are entering the middle class and that are becoming more and more savvy and sophisticated customers. There are 2 regions today that are coming to my mind. First is Middle East. Also, I think it's also the case that to a certain extent in because you have both new customers that are entering the market and customers that are already very, very sophisticated. If you talk, for instance, about fragrances in savviest customer. Then, as another field of transformation and how beauty is evolving, probably we are witnessing a lot of new ways of approaching beauty, blending with aesthetics, blending with wellness, blending with sports. I would say that beauty is expanding and merging a lot with, it's expanding from how we look to a real lifestyle. That's also a very interesting opportunity. And the last big change is technology. So, and of course, when you're talking about technology, AI is at the center of many changes because it's really changing how we serve the customer today. You can have a better diagnostic of the customers. You can build personalized offers. And I really believe that those who can learn how to use these tools will move much faster.
Do you feel that local leaders can influence or can shape global decision, but beyond that, what limits local leaders from shaping global?
I think for me, probably, I believe that companies should give their leaders more opportunities to work on both sides, to go back and forth between local and HQ. For two reasons. First, I think it's broadened the perspective. Local leaders can learn what has been done elsewhere and apply it later in their countries. And also, people who are in the headquarters, if they've been working on the field, can have a much better understanding of what works, what doesn't work. And in my mind, in fact, when leaders understand both worlds, they are faster, they are better, and they also know how to talk to each other in a much more efficient way. So the companies who are enabling this back and forth, who are building the careers with this path that enables people to go from HQ to local, I think are the one who are...
Do you see that any KPIs that you see traveling, and which ones do you think are not really?
So I think that... to make it simple, quantitative KPIs travel quite well. You want to talk about sales, growth, market share, how many new customers you should have, what is the average basket. This is something that you can put on a dashboard and you can easily compare from one country to the other, from one region to the other. What is much more difficult is to assess the softer skills or the cultural dimensions. For instance, for me, I worked in North America and in Asia. I was in Canada. I discovered that field people were real entrepreneurs, you know. They had a huge energy, huge initiative, and this is something you can really build on. In Asia, a store manager is using much more detailed KPIs, how many customers you see, how many customers will receive a hand massage, for instance, or makeup. So that's very, very precise. And there is good in both. And in fact, you have to be able to push the button on both. So maybe bringing more entrepreneurship in Asia, bringing more KPIs in North America. That's the most difficult still to systemize. And even more because people who, when you try to centralize that at HQ level, you are talking to people who are in the headquarters, but not as exposed to the field, to the day-to-day realities. So it's even more difficult for them to even imagine these ways of working. So that I think is the next limit to find the ways to take the best local approach in terms of soft skills and to find a way to make it applicable in other countries.
I'd like to come back to career. Do you feel there is any assignment that most accelerated your career? And what made it high leverage?
I think that there have been several... my career has been quite linear, but clearly I can identify some acceleration points. So the first one, when I started in product development, was the launch of Absolue, which became a huge range, and still today. And the second one was the launch of Génifique for Lancôme. So that's clearly two milestones and two very big ranges today. Then I think the second big acceleration was when I came to China with Lancôme. When I came to China, initially it was for 2 or 3 years, and I haven't been in Asia for over 15 years now. So it was a big change. After that, in fact, when I joined Dior, Parfum Christian Dior, became number one in makeup, number one in fragrance with Dior China, was clearly another defining moment for me. And finally, I would say the last key change for me when I came back to a global role, taking over Coty as Coty Travel Retail as SVP for global travel retail. Because this was interesting. It was a way for me to exit out of a single market vision and to work back again on a global vision, which is also very interesting because you're working with teams in the US, in South America, in Europe and Africa, and of course in Asia.
And sometimes there are some roles that sound very glamorous, but they don't really pay off or they don't compound. Did it happen to you? And if yes, what was missing?
I think it happened to me once. And first, I think it's important that you know why you're taking some roles and what you like in what you do. What I realized is that what I really like is to be placed in roles where I can collaborate closely with the HQ and work on the brand strategy, on the brand elevation. And I had sometimes, I had in mind one position where basically I was mainly focused on sales, so delivering the top line, delivering the bottom line, but no real impact in the brand strategy. And this is really something I missed. And in fact, this was also after one of the reasons why I changed the role and went back to China, because I think that when you are in China, for instance, you have to have this, it's so big that you have to have this collaboration with global teams on building
Were there any move you do earlier or skip completely entirely? And also, if you had 36 months again in China, what would you stack first?
So if I could do something differently, I think that what I would do is I would try to do more back and forth between headquarters and the market. What I noticed is that when I was in HQ, most of the ideas that came to me were coming from what I had learned or seen on the market. So I really believe there is a very strong cross-fertilization. But the difficulty is that when you enter into a path, if you are becoming the expert of China, then the companies will tend to let you stay there as long as you perform. And I believe that going this back and forth enables you, yes, to understand the market, but going back to HQ, you to elevate the brands, to have a more global vision. So that's really something I would like to do more. And I think that's clearly what's something that bridges, that builds, in fact, today the strong leaders is capacity to have this strategic vision and this knowledge of local execution. If you had the 36 months more in China, I think I would probably go to discover even more places. It's a land of opportunity. Beyond the field, you need to talk to people. It's evolving very fast, so I would be even more on the field. And what I try to do is to bring as much as possible people from the headquarters with me.
Have any advice to local leaders navigating headquarter pressure and also local realities?
So there was something I was taught at LVMH is that senior leadership loves autonomy but hates independence. And I think that's something very important to keep in mind when you work as a local leader for a global brand. Because it is a very, very important way very interesting way to set up the mindset of your teams. On the one side, it avoids strategic drifts, and at the same time, it enables entrepreneurship and initiative. So that's, I would say, the best advice I received and the best advice I could give.
If you were 35 today in Asia, what bets would you place to stay relevant despite decoupling?
So I'm in Asia, but I wish I wish I were 35 again. Overall, I still feel that I still believe that Asia is the right place to be, especially for doing business. China remains China, and apart from the US, there is no other country with such a scale. You have very sophisticated markets like Japan, like Korea, with very strong soft power, and at the same time, you have Southeast Asia, which is booming and extremely diverse. And if you look at broader vision of Asia, including India, Saudi Arabia, these are probably the two fastest growing markets today for beauty. If I were 35, I would surely stay in Asia, and probably I would try to catch the rocket that is taking off in India and Saudi Arabia.
And now coming to building local leaders, you've been there. And when you evaluate successes, what are the top 5 traits, or how do you test them to find your own successor or to find successes?
So what I try to, if I had to give just 5 traits, I would say first, they have to be result oriented. They have to deliver consistently. Second, they have to have the capacity to lead the team and to develop people. Third, they need a strategic mindset, which is, yes, delivering the short-term targets, but at the same time understanding a bigger picture. Fourth, we're coming back to the capacity to co-create and collaborate with headquarters, because you need to be able to build projects that are both locally relevant and aligned with global. And finally, I think what is really important is to be a true ambassador of the group, of the brand. So you have to represent the company, its values, and to show integrity.
And which traits are hardest to find in that?
So that's quite tricky, because in fact everybody is different, so there is not one answer. What I really value is really people who take initiative. So people who first take initiative and then can bring others along. Well, instead of working in isolation, people who are working with others and motivating others. I also look for transparency. This is really important. As I'm a leader, I need to understand what people in my team are doing. Otherwise, I cannot support them. And last, I think coming back to what we said, the fighting spirit to achieve results.
And what do local leaders often misunderstand about global strategy and politics?
Local leaders, by definition, they are local, so they know very well their market, but sometimes they miss a broader vision. I think this is why it's important for me to keep them connected with headquarters and to make sure that the teams in the countries have a strong network, internal network with HQ and also with other countries. Because in the end, you need to understand this global context, their priorities, their timings, and if you don't understand that, sometimes some of your proposals will be refused, will die, just because they were not made at the right timing or in the right way.
And when it comes to a promotion, there is the performance, right? And there is also the relationship and the connections with the leaders or the reports. There is also the ability to be innovative and creative. What's the weighting that you see when it comes to promotion time? What breaks ties?
So you're right. First thing is the foundation of promotion is the performance. But then what makes the big difference is the potential. So the potential to lead a bigger team, the potential to take on more complex projects, to be more visible. And so it's more than just hard skills. It's also soft skills. You have to build the relationship. You have to collaborate. You have to come with creative solutions because you will be exposed to problems that are new to you or new to the companies, and you have to find solutions. And in the end, when you have two people, with the same performance, which happens sometimes, what will make the difference is these soft skills. So how do the people engage with others? How do they think creatively? And that will make the difference between two people.
Have you seen any career killer, or what would you qualify as career killer mistakes that you've seen local?
I've seen a few. One, for instance, we're talking about, loving autonomy, hating independence. When you work independently, you go by yourself, you expose yourself a lot, and this can be placing yourself in a very dangerous situation. Another one, which is maybe not as obvious, and is specifically for expats, is that when you're relying only on one relationship at headquarters. So imagine that you are visible to headquarters, to the management, only through your boss. So if you have very good relationship with your boss, the relationship is strong, all fine. But imagine your boss is changing. You have another one with a weaker connection, or you have another one who wants to bring his team. And this can lead quite fast to an isolation of the expat. So my advice is really to stay connected with several people in HQ, across functions, across levels, and to keep visibility. It will help you to keep visible. It will give you a perspective, not only what is coming from one person, and it will make sure also enable you to be part of the conversation, even if things change.
Guilhem, that was very insightful. It was a real pleasure to have you today. I hope and I'm sure that our listeners will enjoy it as much. And thank you again. Thank you for listening to Leaders in Motion. And if you want to go further, join the Leaders in Motion Academy, our executive program. The first step is simple. Subscribe to our newsletter in the show notes, and you'll get access to our exclusive insights and all the details about the Academy. This podcast is produced by Melanie Hong, who helps leaders and organizations create strategic podcasts. I'm Kevin Hong, and see you next time.